you check the children? Show a little match sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Freight fans, and welcome back to the Horror Show. I'm Jaime and Fuego, and so very stoked to be bringing you a review of a new film that recently hit theaters. I'm not sure if it's in like a full wide release, as certain YouTube personalities like to describe it as, but you know, it was at least in a ton of theaters here in the deadly desert of the Phoenix, Arizona metropolitan area and stuff like that. But this is a film entitled Strange Harvest, and so this is written and directed by Stuart Ortiz, who I guess was half of the minds behind the Grave Encounters films that I think there were two of. I know that we did reviews on the Horror Show here, not myself, but I remember very distinctly making one of the thumbnails for this, but or for one of those reviews. I think it was like a Patreon or something. But yeah, that was a Marsha and Cecil thing. We miss you, Marsha, just in case you end up having to see this. But yeah, man, so I knew pretty much donuts going into this as to what it was actually about. I knew it was like serial killer stuff, but I was thinking it was, based on the track record of this dude, a found footage sort of film, but that it is not. This is like, I hate using the term mockumentary because anytime I mention mockumentary myself and then immediately tons of other peeps all too often think, okay, like Spinal Tap, any of the Kristopher Guest stuff, or even more recently, Pop Star Never Stop, Never Stopping, which if you guys have not seen that friggin' movie, woohoo, it is amazingly hilarious from the Lonely Island guys. So, I would say just like a fake, like, true crime sort of special, like documentary sort of thing, because of the fact that I'm not really a true crime person at all, but based on my significant other, I am subjected to a lot of that stuff. I would imagine many of your girlfriends and wives just adore that sort of stuff. It's just less my jam, personal preference and stuff, but it is most definitely all the rage, whether it's podcasts or whether it's actual specials on Netflix or, whatever the hell it may be. And so Strange Harvest basically recreates the feel of one of those specials. I think it was the most recent one that I was subjected to. I think it was like Gabby Petito, something like that. The girl who was trying to be a YouTuber and went missing. And there was the whole, just search for her, trying to figure out, what happened. And then, and then killed and, trying to figure out who's to blame, whatever. So this essentially does recreate, and in my estimation, we always like to give overall thoughts, and then we'll shift into story and acting and effects and, whatnot. This very convincingly, at least for me, recreated one of those specials. And for that sheer fact, it actually was a significant plus for me. Even though I don't really like this sort of stuff in the real world, as far as like based on actual cases, it very convincingly makes you believe that this is in fact an actual case that went down in San Bernardino, that there was this killer that went under the moniker of Mr. Smiley, started out in the 90s and then kind of reemerged in the aughts. And so, yeah, I was convinced, and it plays it very straight in the fact that, it tries to make you believe that this all happened in, like, true life, in all actuality. And the performances from everybody, the different detectives that were, allegedly on the case or on this fictional case, they're all just, they play it up. And I didn't think for a second that these actors were not actual law enforcement. And then also, maybe with some of those connected with the victims, because if I'm trying to remember, I believe there were 14 different victims over the course of Mr. Smiley's tenure of murder. But yeah, man, all of the victim adjacent people, I guess is the better way of describing it. Those who knew the people who were killed, and possible witnesses to who, because they're trying to figure out who the hell Mr. Smiley is, and I'll get into that as we go through the like storytelling and whatnot. But yeah, so it was very slickly put together by Stuart Ortiz and his team, and also the fact that I don't know if this is commonplace in some of these true crime documentaries where you see actual murder scene photos, or just, maybe some footage that was being taken by coroners or, those who are investigating these crime scenes and whatnot, whether on body cams or maybe, filming stuff. I don't think that is commonplace for, to see, just the grisly scene of death as it's being investigated. But who knows? I haven't really watched enough of those to, as I personally, they're not my jam, but, but it does a pretty gnarly job with some of these death, murder scenes and whatnot. So props in that regard. It's very obviously low budget, but damn, did they do a lot with what I would imagine was relatively little, and they do it, as I said, they very convincingly. So that is a props to, Stuart Ortiz and his entire team behind this. So story, as I said, in San Bernardino County, which is, I think, an hour or so from Los Angeles County in Southern California. That's where in the mid-90s there was a stream of a few murders that took place. They didn't initially think that it was serial killer status. They didn't see a connection. Then, in turn, they start to realize as things are getting, mailed to cops and whatnot, which are, tropes that we have seen before in actual fictionalized, serial killer films and television series and whatnot. But, so, after a while, especially when the brashness of this killer is increasing, and also where the competency of the killer is increasing, that's definitely where, yeah, it's pretty evident that we have one person behind this now, or at least one face behind it, Mr. Smiley. Could there be an accomplice? That's always, Scream will always make me think, yeah, it's, could one person have done all of this? That sort of wondering question. But then the murders stop for an extended period of time, well over a decade, but then they start anew. I'm trying to remember if it's 2011 when they start anew, or right around, the turn from the 2000s to the 2010s. But in any event, it's all in hindsight within this documentary, because you're interviewing all of these people, the main two investigators, a man and a woman who are, behind investigating this over the years, and, just how it became not just a fervent passion, but also just this the horrible gut punch that investigating something like that would be. And then, of course, they interview different experts. Then you get into all kinds of different things, because this veers from a storytelling standpoint, without getting into spoilers or anything. There's more going on here than just a person murdering people, when it starts to peel back the layers of the motivation of this Mr. Smiley, and why he would be doing this, and certain things that he had potentially been studying and getting into, and trying to make a connection, with this killer and the murders and everything. Because anytime you see a very specific symbol, it's I'm trying to recall if it's a triangle with different dots and whatever. So there is with, I think it's 3 dots, and then in any event, it's been a week since I've seen this at this particular point, guys. But so there is more to the method of this madness than just, very calculatedly going around and murdering people, because the dude is incredibly smart in covering his tracks, not leaving any prints, you name it. That's how the most notorious serial killers are able to continue, doing this for as long as they do, because of the fact that they do often have lulls. They do just very meticulously and implicitly cover their tracks. I mean, they don't give in to the temptation of going back to the murder scenes and doing all of these things that eventually get people caught, at least from my understanding of this sort of stuff. So, but the lore and the motivation behind Mr. Smiley, I thought, was what elevated this from being just your standard sort of, fake, murder documentary sort of fare, and made it significantly more interesting, because it is pretty crazily tied in with scientific things, some religious things, not getting into any specifics, obviously. But yeah, I was intrigued, and it actually hooked me in more so than I was anticipating. And really, there's not much story that I can divulge beyond that, because I've given you the skeletal structure, the framework of it, in the fact that, yeah, this guy was killing for a number of years, took a break, got back at it. You do have some revelations as to why that took place, and the reasoning behind it and everything. But yeah, and it really is just the whole peeling back those layers, as I said, not just of the motivation of the killer, but also how just getting a little breadcrumb here and a little breadcrumb there, was able to help these guys crack the case. No, but it took well over a decade, decades, I believe, when it was close to 2 decades when it was all said and done, at least as far as the lore of this particular tale goes. And so that's about all I can say, man. I've already, as far as acting goes, touched upon it. There's really only an interview or two between like some of these, you know, witnesses and stuff. There's one guy that I remember, I believe he was like a security guard when somebody gets killed at a donut shop, and you know, he's giving like his little interview to, like, because there's also fake news reports, I mean, interviewers on the scene. You get the full 9 yards. It covers all the bases of, you know, showing archival footage from, you know, local news, and then also interviewing those connected to victims, and also, you know, like surviving members of there's some gnarly deaths in this, so I'll get to it here, you know, once I get past the acting. But you know, there are 2 parents that are interviewed at one particular point that I felt that they were a little stiff. I mean, but really for the most part, pretty consistently. One of the earlier victims, there's a friend that, and there is a little bit of humor in some of these interviews, whether it's like the profane aspect of the 2 investigative detectives to one of the early victims, who's this younger woman. They interview her best friend all these years later, and she's just kind of like this vulgar rocker chick, you know, who's like, you know, getting a little longer in the tooth in age, but she's funny. I mean, so there is some bits of dark humor and stuff, and a little bit of levity to, you know, not make everything so deathly serious, despite the fact that the subject matter is obviously deathly serious. And so, yeah, acting, there weren't really any, even the ones that I nitpicked a little bit, they didn't stand out like full-on sore thumbs or anything like that. So if you had terrible acting from these faux interviews, it would really just take you out of the believability of this film. And for me, it worked. You know, I was sucked in, I was locked in, and I was buying it. So yeah, that's props to, you know, the casting director, and, you know, just the way that they were, you know, directed by Stewart and you know, and his team and everything. So this is where I really have to give some of my favorite aspects to this as well. Now, this is where it makes it feel more like a movie than a documentary, but still, props to the effects in this movie, most notably the gore effects, because, and also the set design of some of these areas where there is victims that are being discovered, because of the fact that, I mean, and also just how they thought out the different ways that Mr. Smiley killed people. Like an earlier set of deaths that you see, there are buckets that are being utilized, and there's like different levels that are drawn with like a black marker or something that show like this level is, you know, this, because he bleeds them, you know, and their blood is filling these buckets, and it's like this level is this level is this level is death. And so he's like, when I know that I have reached these thresholds of blood from these people I'm draining, they're going to be dead. Also, the set design of like putting the symbol, painting it in blood on like the ceiling and stuff like that was pretty rad. There's also a use of leeches and like this huge pool in this abandoned, like, I don't know, old, like, you know, rec center or something like that. That's pretty rad status. There's another bit on a playground that is well done, where a body is found there that's just like been disemboweled and like, you know, like back ripped up and all this different stuff. So it doesn't feel to me like the sort of thing that would be allowed to be shown in a documentary of this nature, unless it was going like, I don't know, direct to VOD, or at least back in my day, and, you know, like the 80s and 90s and stuff, if it was going direct to video and it was an unrated situation and they justified showing this sort of stuff because, you know, it's a doc, it's non-fiction, it's not a feature film that is out there trying to glorify the carnage. Although in my estimation, at least, personal opinion, these sort of programs do in fact glorify the carnage. And so, but, you know, that's just like my opinion, man, you know. So major props in the gore department and the practical effects, and also in the set design department, you know. So that's really, I mean, being a doc, there's not much as far as you're going to have as, you know, score-wise or anything of that nature. But really from the sound design, when there are a couple instances where there's footage that, whether it's security cam or whether it's, there's a character that is doing like a vlog, and the attacker, Mr. Smiley, comes in during that particular point. So there are scenes where it's not just the aftermath being investigated and filmed or whatever. There are other scenes where you most definitely see the killer doing their thing. There's another bit where Smiley is actually filming somebody that he has kidnapped, that he is intending to kill. So, I mean, yeah, when you're hearing like the slash and the smash and, you know, bones breaking and, you know, people being shot, and it's just all very convincingly put together. I just have to give praise to Stuart Ortiz or something. I'm wrapping this up, obviously, at this particular point, because I've hit all of my notes, but still, man, I feel like this film did a lot with a little. And if I didn't tell the average true crime enthusiast, because I used to produce a true crime podcast, it was called Profiling Pain. Shout out to my former vocalist for my band Chiron, Chris Payne, a true crime enthusiast, you know, beyond even a lot of the women that I know, man. That dude loves this stuff. And so, yeah, that was like the dynamic of that podcast, though, was he would feed me the stories of, you know, these investigations, and then I would react, and, you know, I would, you know, hit all the buttons, do the post, and, you know, edit it and everything. But if I had just shown this to somebody without giving any context, without saying, hey, yeah, this is, you know, this is something fictional, you know, it presents itself as being real when it's obviously not. It is that believable and that slickly put together that I think you would bait, line, and sinker, man. They would believe. So that's some high praise, I think, especially from somebody like me who doesn't dig this subject matter. I think that is definitely high praise from me for anybody who might have some interest in checking out Strange Harvest. So, yep, that is Stuart Ortiz's current film that I know it's in limited theaters. I would definitely recommend, if you like this sort of stuff, you would probably enjoy it even more than I did, because this isn't my game, man. This isn't my jam, as I mentioned earlier, and I still quite like this movie. So if you're a true crime enthusiast, I think you would really dig the hell out of this. So I extend the grande gracias up in Jaime and Fuego. You can find Moi on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, where I have Infuegotainment, my own personal channel. I've been doing some non-spooktacular Fantasia Fest coverage, so we got to do some virtual press for that. But the biggest thing here on the Horror Show channel is doing the like, the share, the subscribe thing, and commenting if you have actually seen this film. Did you think that I'm giving it, that I'm kind of, you know, cupping the statue a little too much? Am I, you know, too much praise? Am I cutting it too much slack? Did you think it wasn't believable? It was silly? Whatever. I mean, hey, art is subjective, so let us know down in the comment section below. So, yep, once again, I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and, yep, until the next review, Fright fans, remember, stay scared.